This is Gemara in Pesachim Daf Yomi Clear Concise. For Shleim v'Chaim v'Chaz v'Malki Yidumei v'Nikir Yemen v'Mvigel Chaim v'Sash Shamsim v'Yizid Sar v'Askeni v'Zim v'Chaisari Sachem Sarasna Yosef Yol v'Midol Yel v'Pitzin Shavalei Shamim v'Asnavim v'Shafig v'Shirchana v'Altav v'Nitri v'Daniel v'Chan Rizal Yisrael Chaim v'Yudis Livracha v'Astav Musa Avram Svi v'Masha Esther v'Sayisha Echeli Yisrael as well as Schos Zivor v'Atalea Bas Ita. We pick it on the top of Yud and Aleph, and we're in the middle of discussing something that Rashi called Piskei Halachisim. That we started off yesterday with two cases. We had a case of Tisha Tziburim Shal Matzah and one pile of Chametz, and then we had another case where part of it separated. And the two basic rules that we learned yesterday were two tremendous sugyas that, of course, will come up through as we go through Shas. One is that Kol Kavua Kemechsa Mechsadami. That when something is set in its place, then even if the majority of those items are one entity, still we say it's set in its place. Kavua Kemechsa Mechsadami. It's like it's 50-50, and therefore, in a case of Isser, a suffix is going to have to be Lahachmir, it's going to be stringent. The next case we learned is that when something separates from the pile, called the parish, if it separates, then miruba de parish, that's when we assume it came from the roiv, and that is when we're going to have a potential leniency in the event that the roiv is lekula are lenient. So we pick it up today on the top of Yudam Manal, 3 lines down. Says the Gemara, a third case. Tzibar echad shel chametz. You have one pile of chametz. Ulafanav, and in front of that one pile of chametz, bees batim bedukim. There are two houses that have been checked for chametz. Vasa achbar, and achbar comes. V'shakol, and he comes. So again, what's the problem over here? Again, what's the case? The case is you have a pile of chametz and you have two houses that were checked, and you don't know. V'lo yadina, says the Gemara, you don't know ilahayol. You don't know which house the mouse went into. Again, you know there's a pile of chametz. You know there are two houses. You know the mouse went into one house. You're not sure which house the mouse went into. Says the Gemara, Hainu, this is the famous case of Shnei Shvilin. This is the famous case of two roads. That what? It's now we learned in the Mishnah. Shnei Shvilin echad tami v'echad tar. You have two roads. One road is tar, one road is tami. V'aloch v'echad mihem. And you go down one of them. Vasa Tyrus, and then you touch something which is tar, meaning you potentially just went down a road that was tummy, and then you would have contracted tama, and you went and you touched it tame, touched something that was tar. Then your friend came, and what did he do? And he went down the second road. Vasa Tyrus, and he as well touched Tyrus. And now, what's the question? The question is, there's two different roads. One road is tar. One road is tummy. There's two different people. One person went down probably the tar road, and one went down the tummy road. Not probably, for sure, because they went down two different roads. So the question is, what do we do now with the food that they touched? Says the Gemara. Rav Yehuda, if each of them come to ask the question on their own, then the din is tahirin. We are allowed to paskin for each one of them in a bubble, and we're allowed to almost close our eyes and pretend that the other one does not exist, and therefore each one we're going to allow to say it's a suffix, and we're going to be allowed to say that it is tahar. Why are we allowed to say it's tahar? To look at Rashi in the narrow lines, about 7 lines in, Rashi says, in this alu, if they come to ask, Rashi says, B'safek tumah l'rshus harabim sfeikei tahar. A very important rule, that whenever we have a suffix of tumah l'rshus harabim, we're allowed to view that suffix is lekula, then we say the item is tahar. So over here, we have a suffix of tumah and l'rshus harabim. We have two different potential roads, one tar, one tame, but we're allowed to view each one independently and say it is tar. However, shteim v'zachas, if they both come at the same time, then what are we going to do? There's nothing we could do, and rather we have to say tame, and we are forced, but we have no answer but to answer that they are both going to be tame. That is the first opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosi Aimer, ben gach uben gach tebeim. Whether they come together, whether they come separately, the bottom line is, because we know that one of them was tamei, therefore we have to assume that the food that they touch is tamei. Amar Rav v'yitem Rav Yechon, b'vas achas, if they come at the same time, they're called tameim. B'zachar zeh, if they come one after another, they're called tahirin. Okay, so we have 3 opinions over here. Says, I'm sorry, this Rava is now modifying the machlekes Rav Yehuda and Rav Yosi. Says Rava, lo nechlu ella b'balishu alav v'al chaveiroi. When you come to ask for yourself, and you come to ask for your friend, do we consider, when you are asking for yourself and him, do we consider that as if you're coming together and therefore it's going to be tamei, or do we consider that as if it's coming separately, therefore it's going to be tahor? Rav Yossi mitam levasachas, Rav Yehuda mitam le lezachar. According to Rav Yossi, it's going to be tamei. According to Rav Yehuda, it's going to be tahor. So now that was a beautiful rendition of this case of Shtei Shvilin, but what does that have to do with our case of chametz? So it's going to be the same answer. Again, we had two piles, we had a mouse, so now it's going to depend. And then we had two different houses, so it depends. Did each person, each house come to ask the shayla by themselves? If they come by themselves, then we're allowed to say that each one is going to be not have to do a new bedika. If they come together, then what are we going to have to say? Then we're going to have to say, I'm sorry, you both have to go and do a new bedika. And now if they come, one person come asking about himself and about his friend, then that would be the machlekes Rav Yehuda and Rav Yossi. Rav Yossi says it's equatable to them coming together and they have to do bedika. Rav Yehuda says it's equatable to them to come one after another and they do not have to do bedika. That is the third din. Again, the basic rule that we just learned is that whenever we have two different items and we don't know if two different people did them and they both went down, each one independently, so then we're allowed, if they come together, we have to be machmer. If they come separately, we're allowed to be mekel. And if one person comes to ask for himself another guy, that is going to be the machlekes Rav Yehuda and Rav Yossi. Similarly, on case of the chametz, says the Gemara, now this is the fourth case of these Piskei Dinim that we're discussing. Safek ol, safek loy ol. Now, if we have a safek, did a mouse enter into the house? This house was checked for a bedikas chametz. We're not sure if a mouse went in or not. Safek ol, safek loy ol. Hainu, says the Gemara, pika. That is the case of the bika of all these open fields. What's this case of the bika? Says the Gemara. Uplukta the Rav Elazar Rabbanan machlekes, Rav Eliezer and the Rabbanan. It's not to the Mishnah. Hanichlas the bika of Yimosek Shamim. If someone enters into the bika, if someone enters into this open field during the rainy season, if he enters during the rainy season, v'toma v'sada pleinis. And so detail number one is the rainy season, which we'll explain in a moment. Detail number two is the Tuma B'Sada Plainis. And we know for sure that in one of the fields in this Bika, there is Tuma. Va'amar, and he says, Echad alachti l'bamakim alos. And someone said, I went into that area. But we don't know, we don't know, did he go into the field that has the Tuma, that has the kever, the grave, or not? So again, detail number one, it is Yimoisei Geshamim. Why do we care? Look at Rashi towards the end of the narrow lines, about 10 lines for the end of the narrow lines. Rashi says, Havi Bika Rishus HaYachid L'Toma. It's going to be considered Rishus HaYachid. What's the difference during the rainy season? What's the reason? Because everything already sprouted. Rashi says everything's already growing, and no one's really allowed to walk into that field. And therefore, what's the difference of Rishus HaYachid? V'kaim Alana, we hold Safik Toma, Rishus HaYachid Sfeikoi Tamei. Is Safik and Rishus HaYachid, it is Tamei. This is obviously the flip side of the previous case. In the previous case, we said what? It was Safik Tama Rishus HaRabim, and the rule there was Safik Tar. In this case, it's Safik Tama Rishus HaYachid, and therefore Safik Tamei. So we have a Safik Tama. So generally the rule is going to be Safik Tamei. And again, the case was, you have all these fields. One of the fields was Tamei, and we're not sure if this person went into that Tamei field or not. Says the Gemara of Rav Eliezer Mitayer, v'chachamim mitamim. Machlekes Rav Eliezer and the chachamim. What's the machlekes? Shei Rav Eliezer Aimer. Rav Eliezer used to say, Safik bia tar. If we're not sure if someone went in, then it's tar. Safik magatoma tame. But if we know a person went in, we're just not sure if he touched a certain item, then it's going to be tame. Therefore, in our case, we know for sure he entered. We just don't know if he entered into this field. So that's going to be, says Rav Eliezer, that's a Safik Bia. We're not sure if he went in. Therefore, it's going to be Tahar. So what does it have to do with our case of the mouse? Again, we're going to apply the exact same rule that when we're not sure if the mouse entered the house, says Rav, that rhymed, mouse entered the house, says Rav Eliezer, then what? Lakula. It's going to be Tahar. It's going to be, you're not going to have to check it again. Why? Because this is going to be a similar din to this case of Safik Tamar Shayachid, that it's the din Derabanan, Tzveikai Tamei, but on Safik Bia, if we're not sure if a person went in to contract the Tama, that's going to be comparable to the mouse going in, and in that case, we're going to be Mekel. That is Rav Eliezer, and that is how we're answering the case of when we're not sure if the mouse went in to the house. Says the Gemara further. Oh, ubadak, v'lo yashkach. Now we're in case number 5. This time we know a mouse went in. And now, so what are you doing if you know a mouse goes into your house? Go look for it. However, v'lo yashkach, you didn't find the mouse. Plugged to the Rameh Rabban. Ditnan, we learned in the Mishnah, Rameh Omer, called over Shebchazkas Toma, anything that has a chazak of Toma. Let them move it to Masu, we assume it's Tama, actually, Vadalcha, Tama Yichanu, till you know where the Tama went. V'chachamim Omerim, no. But they got you Megia, Lesela, Lekarka, Vesula, you have to check until you reach the layer of rock, or at least the layer of the ground, and then if you don't find the Tama, you assume it's not there anymore. So in this case, it's going to be similar to our case of the mouse, that according to Rameir, you're going to search the house, as long as you don't find you're going to search the house, as long as you don't find the mouse, then you're not going to have to search again, because the whole din of B'dika is a din derabanan. And now we continue. All ubadak v'ashkach. That was case number 5. So case number 5 was the mouse went in, and you did not find the mouse. Case number 6, the mouse went into the house, and then what? Uvashkach. And you searched, and you actually found the mouse. Or better yet, you found some chametz. What's the problem? You don't know if this is the same chametz that the mouse went in. Again, I'm sorry if I didn't mention. When we say the mouse went in, we don't care about the mouse. We're not mouse trappers. That's not the point over here. The point is that the mouse went in holding some chametz. So in the previous case, the question was, you didn't find that chametz. So it says Rameir, it's okay. We assume the mouse ate it up. It's all over. In our case, the mouse goes in. The mouse is eating his little roll over there. And then you go and you find chametz. What's the question? You don't know. Is that the same chametz that the mouse brought in? Says the Gemara, Plukta the Rebbe of Shimon al Gamliel, the Tanya. Saw the Shnever by Kever. If you have a field in which there was a kever, there was a grave in there, and we can't find it, the grave was lost, we don't know exactly where it is. If you go into that field, you're going to be tummy. You're going to have to assume you touch the kever, the grave. Nimsa ba kever. But let's say you go and you find the kever. Then if you enter the rest of the field, of course it's tar, because you assume that this was the grave that you lost. Shani Oimer says Rav Shimon Gamliel, kever sha'avad, who kever shenimsa. That's what you found to be Rebbe. I'm sorry, that's Rebbe. Shimon Gamliel Oimer tibadikol asadikuli. You have to check the whole field. So this is going to be the same case in our case of the mouse. Again, a mouse went into the house with a piece of chametz, and then you find that piece of bread. What is the din in that case? So this is going to be the same machlek as Rebbe and Rav Shimon Gamliel. According to Rabbi, you assume the chametz that you found was the chametz that was lost. According to Shimon Gamliel, absolutely not. The rest of the house has to be searched. And now we move on to case number 9. Hiniach teisha matzah eser. This is usually people have the issue the other way. But this person put down 9 pieces of chametz and he found 10. Plukta, I'm sorry. The Rabbi v'Rabbanan. The Tani went to the Raisa. Hiniach mano matzah masayim. You have meiser sheni money. So you put in mana, let's pretend you put $100 in a box, and then you later, what happens, you come back and you find 2 mana. And you don't know, wait, I didn't put another 100 in there, what's going on? I didn't put another mana in there. No, we assume that by accident you put in chulin in the same box with the meiser sheni, it's all mixed together. Divrei, Rabbi, and now you're going to have to deal with it as if it's a suffix, and you're going to have to be paided, etc. But says the Chachamim, no, Akol Chulin. We assume that it's all going to be Chulin. Why? We're going to assume what happened over here. Why the 2 mana? You only put 1 mana meiser sheni. So we're going to assume, you know what happened? You took out the original mana and you put in a second mana, but it's all Chulin. So now let's go back to our case. You have a mouse. I'm sorry, 1 second. Yeah, you have a mouse, and the mouse went into the house with some chametz. No, I'm sorry, one more time. What's the case over here? You put down 9 pieces of bread, and you found the 10th piece of bread, so it's going to be the same machlokes. According to 1 second, I'm sorry. According to Rabbi, what are we going to say? That we're going to assume that these are the same pieces that you put there, and then you just add another piece, and therefore you don't have to search again. Again, just like in the case of the meiser sheni money, what did Rabbi say? Rabbi said, "Chulin meiser sheni muravim zeh." You assume that what happened, you put an extra thing into the box. You don't assume that you lost the first stuff, and therefore, so too in our case, you're going to assume that this 10 pieces of bread is just another piece that you found. But you don't have to assume that you lost some of the original 9. Whereas the Chacham are going to say, "No, kol chulin." What do they hold? They held that in this box you must have taken out the meiser sheni. So now if things don't add up, basically the point of contention is, when things don't add up, do we assume that you did something funny and you lost it? The Chacham say yes. So according to the Chacham, you're going to have to check your allowance again for chametz. And we continue into case number, I think we're up to number 10 or something, number 9. You put down 10 pieces of bread and you find 9. Last case. I do seifa. This is the end of the previous brisa. Tani learned to the brisa. Hiniach masayim if you put 2 mana, umatza mana, and you only found 1 mana. Munach umana mutal. What do we assume? We assume that a mana of the original 2 was put in there, and the other mana was removed. Different Rebbe. Basically, again, Rebbe going with the same common thread. We don't assume something funny happened. You assume you just lost part of the original one. So too, in this case, we're going to assume you just lost one of the original ones, and therefore you're going to be okay. Therefore in this case, the opposite. Therefore in this case, according to Rebbe, you're going to have to search. But what are you going to have to search for? For one piece, because you only assume one was lost. Everything is chulin, because we assume you did something funny, we assume you took something out, and therefore go to in our case. What are we going to assume? That you put in 10 and you found 9? Or you assume maybe you lost multiples, therefore according to Chachamim, you're going to have to search the entire house again. Now the Gemara concludes, moving along to Yudam and Beis, the top line, the final and last of these cases. Hiniach bezav izu umatza bezav acheres. If you left the chametz in one corner and you find it in another corner, so what happens over here? If you lost the kardim, you lost an axe in your house, habayis tamei. What happens? The entire house, we're gonna have to assume is tamei. What's the reason? Shani oimer. Adam tamei nechlas hasham v'natlai. We assume what's going on over here. How did you lose something? Must be someone came into your house and took your item. And maybe that person came into your house was tamei. And once he came into your house and took one item, who knows what he played with and touched with. And therefore, we have to assume that the entire house is going to be tamei. Now over here, just to point out, the Mefarshim deal with someone walking into my house and taking my items. So they explain that we must be discussing that you're not really allowed to borrow something, but maybe he didn't really know the halacha. But and therefore that's the same reason why we're going to assume that he was tamei. He's also makbid and not makbid on that. But definitely no one should learn this Gemara and say, okay, let's go into my neighbor's house and walk out with their fridge. But either way, said that was the opinion of Rebbe. That was Tani Kama, I'm sorry. Shemi Gamliel Omer says Shemi Gamliel Abayi Star. No, the house is still tar. Why? Shani Omer Shil Achav V'Shachach. You say, you just forgot. Again, it's similar machlekes like we said before. Do we assume that you did something without thinking about it? Do we assume someone else get involved? According to Tani Kama, we assume someone else get involved. So you have to check your whole house again. According to Shemi Gamliel, we say, we assume that you gave it to another person, you just forgot. Or you stam, you put it in another corner and you forgot. And therefore, that's going to be the machlekes with regard to the kardaim, with regard to this axe. In a moment, we're going to play this back into our case. Says Mara, 1 second. Who mentioned anything about a corner? What's going on? What did the Tanakhama say? What was the case? The axe was lost. And that was it. Shimon Gamliel comes along and says, oh, by the way, it's in the other corner. Well, who put the axe in the other corner? Says the Gemara, you're missing some words in the Brisa. If you lost an axe in the house, Habayis Tami, the axe is Tami. What's the reason? Says the Anakama, now the Brisa continues with the second case. Or when you left the axe in one corner, you found it in another corner. Habayis Tami. Again, according to Anakama, it's still going to be Tami. What's the reason? Shani Aimer Adam Tami Nichlas L'Sham. Again, the Tanakhama go with understanding that when something funny happens, we assume someone else got involved. Comes along Shimon Gamliel and he says, no, you're just forgetful. Habayis tar. Shani Aimer Yishilu Acher B'Shachach. You're absent-minded. You lent someone else and you forgot. Or you took it from this corner and you put it in the next corner. So now let's play this back up to our case. What was our case? We put the chametz in corner A and we found it in corner B. According to Shimon Gamliel, you know what you say? You say that no big deal. You just forgot what you were doing. You were cleaning up, and everyone can definitely understand this. Erev Pesach, you're cleaning up, you're moving things around, and you moved it to the other corner. And therefore, do you have to search your house again? No. What's there to be worried about? You're the one that moved it. However, according to the Chachamim, no. We think, no, maybe someone else moved it. Mouse came and moved it. Therefore, you're going to have to search again. Amar Rava. Now we go back to regular dinim of bedikas chametz. Amar Rava, Achbar Nichnas. A mouse comes into your house, about 13 lines down. First one line is Zu. Achbar Nichnas v'kikar b'fiv. And the mouse has a loaf of bread in its mouth. And you run after the mouse and you find crumbs. Sardich bedika. Gotta check your house again. Mice are clean and meat eaters. They don't crumble their food. So if we find crumbs on the floor, we assume it must have been from a different mouse. You gotta check the whole house again. The Gemara continues, and we're going to have progression after progression after progression now. This is for sure a common case. You see a kid coming out with a loaf of bread, and you run after him and you find crumbs on the floor. In this case, we all know the answer here. Ein tzarich badika. Why? That's what kids do. Kids aren't such neat eaters. They crumble the food as they eat, and therefore we assume that those crumbs are from that child that brought in a loaf of bread. You do not need a new badika. Fundamental difference between children eating and mice eating. So I guess the next time our kids make a mess, we should be happy that they're not mice. Says the Gemara further, a mouse enters in the house with a loaf of bread in its mouth. And then the mouse leaves, still with a loaf of bread in its mouth. Do we say, mouse came in with bread, mouse went out with bread, gewaldig. The mouse didn't leave anything behind. The same loaf of bread he brought in, this loaf of bread he went out. Or maybe he went in, dropped that loaf, and found a different loaf. And therefore, you don't have to do medika. Now we'll go further. It's the same loaf of bread. A white mouse went in with a loaf of bread in its mouth. And a black mouse leaves with a loaf of bread. What do we say? Do we say, it's a different mouse? It's a different mouse for sure, a different loaf of bread. And therefore, you got to search the whole house. I don't know. We could assume that the black mouse punched the white mouse in the face, took away his loaf of bread, and came out. And therefore, do you have to do new badika? No, because your house is fine. And we continue number 3. And if you're going to say that, no, in that case, that's too far. Mice don't fight with each other. They don't take food from one another. But what do we say? If mouse went in with a loaf of bread in his mouth, and then the weasel comes out with a loaf of bread. What do we say now? Of course, a weasel could beat up the mouse and take his bread. I don't know. Maybe you still say it's a different one. You know why? You know what the proof is a different one? Because if it would have been the same one, the same loaf of bread, he took it from the mice. We're all thinking that. You know what would have been in the weasel's mouth? Not just the bread, the whole mouse. So the fact that you don't see the mouse in his bread, you don't see the bread in his mouth, maybe that shows us that it's a different bread. Now we continue, step number 4. And if you're going to tell me that in the truth is the weasel, the achbar, took it from the mice, the mouse, and I'm sorry, that if he took it from the mouse, he would have found the mouse in the mouth of the weasel. What happens if the mice run in with bread in its mouth? And then the weasel comes out, and the loaf of bread and the mouse was in his mouth. Just like we thought in the previous step, meaning the weasel walks out with the mouse in its mouth with the loaf of bread. Do we say, this is for sure the same loaf of bread? I don't know. It means that if it would have been the same one, where should the loaf of bread have been? In the mouth of the dead mouse, not in the mouth of the weasel. Meaning, the weasel ran out with 2 things in its mouth. A mouse, big mouth, and a loaf of bread. So says Gemara, what's your proof? If it would have been from that mouse, you know what would have happened? The bread would have still been in the mouse's mouth. Maybe because the mouse got afraid. The mouse dropped it, and the weasel picked it up. And the answer to all these questions are Teku. We need the Beis HaMikdash. We'll have the answer. Ba'i Rava. Some more questions about B'dikas Chametz as we conclude over here 3 lines for the wide lines. Kikar b'shmei kaira. And there's loaf of bread all the way up top high in your house on top of a beam. Do you have to go schlep and get the ladder to take down that chametz? And that's too far. The Rabbanan never made you do such a tircha. Or why? Because it's not going to fall down. Bread doesn't fall on its own, so it's nothing to be concerned about. I don't know. You never know. It's going to blow down, and you might come to eat it. Again, another series. It might fall. Kikaribar, when you have a loaf of bread in a pit, do you have to go down into the pit and get it out? If one thing to fall, gravity, we understand. But to jump out of a pit, for sure not. Maybe you're going to go down into your pit to do what you got to do, and you're going to find the bread and eat it. You might actually go down into the pit and eat it. If the loaf is in the mouth of a snake, Do you have to get something which is chabar is like a item, a charmer to remove the snake? Or no, you don't have to. You just assume the snake ate the bread. To the rabbanan matriach yourself to search for chametz. But they don't make you go hire a snake catcher. You don't have to spend money. Take you again. It's time for the base of Mikdash. Let's just begin the Mishnah that we've seen already. Review Daimer Badkin Arba'asa. You check it the night of the 14th. If you tell the B'Shachris 14th that morning, B'Shas Abir at the time of burning. V'Chacham Ma'imrim no. Loi Badik Arba'asa. Let's say you did not check it the night. Yivdik Arba'asa. You got to check in the morning. Loi Badik Arba'asa. Yivdik B'Shacham Ma'id. Check throughout the entire. You check until the 6th hour of Erev Pesach. If you didn't check by the point of time, you check after the point of time up until it gets nighttime on Pesach. Whatever chametz leave over, this is the sefer that we spoke about previously. You have to hide it. So you don't need another bedika. We'll pick it up from the Gemara tomorrow.